Hi everyone, welcome to the Sky News Daily. Niall Paterson here. And look, as it is almost the weekend, we thought we'd do something just a little bit more reflective, particularly given events happening across the Atlantic. Some of you will have noticed that, of course, Donald Trump has started assembling his team, his cabinet, filling those senior positions around him in the White House. So we are going to be tapping up the experience of a couple of people who know much, much more than I do. Joining us from Capitol Hill itself, Sky's US correspondent, James Matthews. Hi, James.
Hi, Neil. How are you doing?
Very, very well. But we're also welcoming to the podcast Julie Tsirkin, NBC News congressional correspondent. Julie, it's great to have you with us.
It's so great to be here at the end of this crazy week.
Crazy is the way to put it. And look, clearly we were going to get into a couple of the bigger names that Trump has selected in just a moment. But James, clearly Donald Trump is making a statement with the picks that he has made. I'm just a bit confused as to what that statement actually is. Are you?
Most people here actually are not, Neil. I think they have got what they voted for, an administration being shaped very much in Donald Trump's image. One thing I keep hearing is, look, don't be surprised because this is what you were promised. Critics certainly see as something of a freak show in terms of the appointments and names who are in place or will be, should he get his way, to tear down the institutions that he has long despised. I mean, Julie and I are sitting in the Capitol building, the grandeur of this place, and you get a sense of the eye-watering stories about how a country was forged. You know, you're walking through the echo and the polish, the paintings, the statues. You get a sense of the struggles that forged this country into the kind of certainty that we have today, the certainty that has brought us to where we are. There is no certainty about tomorrow. And you look at Donald Trump, you look at the first week since the election, the names that he's presented as the people who will carry this country forward. And certainty, I think, is the last thing that we have.
Julie, let's start then with one appointment which has raised plenty of eyebrows, including Republican eyebrows, for the post of Attorney General, head of the Department of Justice, essentially the government's chief lawyer. Matt Gaetz.
We are here today to authoritatively express that President Trump did not commit an insurrection, and we believe Congress has a unique role in making that declaration. It's not the job of the states, and especially not the job of some bureaucrats in Colorado, to make this assessment and interfere with the rights of voters to cast their vote for the candidate of their choice. The very experts who often get on television and talk about securing democracy seem to be the first to want to then remove a candidate from the ballot because they are afraid that he is too popular.
Not a name that many of us here are familiar with, but I'm sure someone you have chased around the Capitol on many an occasion. Tell me about him.
Oh, yes. And it's funny, I knew who you were talking about when you brought up the appointment that had Republicans scratching their heads, because there were a lot of appointments that could have had Republicans scratching their heads. Tulsi Gabbard is one with her Russia misinformation claims for several years now. But really, it was Matt Gaetz that made the collective reaction. And I hope you don't mind me saying this, but it was really WTF, as we say here in acronym in the United States. I mean, that is what Senate Republicans were telling me when they first got word of Matt Gaetz, and it is because they don't view him as a serious individual. I mean, I've chased him around the halls when he was in the House. I watched him kick Kevin McCarthy out of the speakership slot. In the words of Kevin Cramer, a Senate Republican who never minces his words around here, he said he destroyed the House. This is somebody who Donald Trump nominated to destroy the Department of Justice, as you said, and remake it into the way he wants it to be.
James, this was a man who, until relatively recently, was actually being investigated by the department that he's been tapped up to lead. What was going on there?
He has a murky past. He was investigated by the authorities, Department of Justice, because he allegedly travelled in the company of a 17-year-old girl, took her across state lines, and the alleged crime that they were looking into was that he was sex trafficking. And there was the suggestion of illicit drug use. Now, the Department of Justice, they announced that there were no charges on their part. But of course, the matter persists because the House Ethics Committee, they've been looking into the very same matter. The beauty for Gaetz, having been tapped on the shoulder by Trump, he resigned from Congress. And that means that this ethics report goes no further and the committee's investigation goes no further. that, Julie, might not be the case, though, because there are calls for this report to be published.
There are so many calls for this report to be published. Republicans, I actually haven't met one that said, no, we don't need to know what was in that report, what they investigated. And what I just found out is actually that the full ethics committee meeting where they were going to vote to release this report or not, even though Gaetz has left Congress, that would be breaking some precedent. However, they decided to cancel that meeting. Republicans, you can imagine, are in a tough spot right now, right? They have the leader of their party, somebody who they very much feel like they rode on his coattails to keep in control of the House and Senate. They feel like they owe him. And of course, you don't say no to Trump, especially in this term, his political comeback. I mean, I can't think of a greater one in history, a very unlikely one. And I think this is the first real test for Republicans in Congress, and this guy hasn't even been inaugurated yet. So think about what the next 4 years are going to look like. That being said, I do think the multi-year investigation that the House Ethics Committee had just gone through, regardless if they release their report or not, senators are going to have to see that information when they go through those confirmation hearings before they decide to put him in that top job. Someone told me today that something like 30 Senate Republicans don't want to vote for him at this present moment.
Wow.
But also, I mean, isn't it the case that this was someone, he was there on January the 6th when the riots were taking place outside and, of course, inside Capitol Hill. He was there. But more than that, he was one of those who led the charge, really, didn't he, Julie? According to him, they weren't Donald Trump supporters at all. They were Antifa.
Yeah, they were Antifa, but now those very same January 6th prisoners, he's called them hostages. I mean, if he's in charge of the Department of Justice, you got to wonder what happens to the people that were charged, the hundreds of people that were charged and put in prison for the crimes they committed on that day, for breaking into this building. I mean, I was on this team on that day, and I think for all of us who were here that day and the days surrounding it, you could see how terrified members of Congress were. You could see how terrified Republicans were. No matter what they say now, that was a really dark day here, and they remember Matt Gaetz and the comments that he made. And it's no surprise, because the people pushing him to this spot are Steve Bannon, those conservatives that have been, putting out conspiracy theories when it comes to January 6th. Trump himself has called January 6th prisoners hostages. So it's just not shocking at all that Gaetz is the guy that he wants to lead the very institution tasked with prosecuting the crimes on that day.
I think it's worth mentioning, Neil, that in the hours before Gaetz was picked by Donald Trump, he posted on social media where he said this: abolishing the three-letter agencies from the FBI to ATF, I'm ready to get going. You know, if there was any doubt that this was an individual being appointed to tear down one of the key institutions, part of what Donald Trump would characterize as the deep state, then I think the evidence is there. That's very much his intention. But one point I would make about Trump and about Matt Gaetz, you know, you're talking about somebody being put in place of the justice system, Attorney General.
I talked to a Senate Republican who told me he had to Google whether Matt Gaetz actually has a law degree. He does. But this is an individual who has never actually practiced law. He's never been in a courtroom. And that is very relevant experience if you're going to be an attorney general. I know people who work for the DOJ. The staff there are terrified about who's going to lead them.
Well, is this appointment then just simply because of, the parallels between Matt Gaetz and Donald Trump? Both see themselves as disruptors. Donald Trump tends to view everything through the prism of presentation. Is it just that Matt Gaetz is a performer in the same way that he is, and someone who has displayed the loyalty? I
mean, look, he is somebody who there's not a lot of respect for him, I should say, on either side of the aisle. He is a professional troll, as some may say. He likes to cause chaos and agitate. In fact, the fact that we're having this conversation right now and the fact that we are talking about how everyone is, quote unquote, freaking out in this building, I'm sure he doesn't really mind that so much. But he is calling around to senators, Senate Republicans, at least getting a vibe check, asking them, all right, Like, what are the actual concerns you have about me? Could I actually get confirmed? I reported that yesterday. So is J.D. Vance, the vice president-elect, by the way, trying to figure out how serious is this effort? Is it a waste of political capital, as one Republican said to me? They might wonder when it's all over that it was a total waste of political capital that they could be spending, putting in, changing, monumentally transforming laws and policies. That's what they could be doing instead of this.
Yeah, turning around the oil tanker, I suppose. One thing about all of this, of course, Neil, is that Gaetz and the other controversial appointments, they need to be confirmed by the Senate. And Julie, you were just saying that your sources tell you that as many as 30 Republicans object to Gaetz. That's 30. He needs 50 or more, doesn't he?
Yeah, I mean, listen, that's right now, right? And we've seen this movie play out with Donald Trump before. Republicans say, we're going to oppose him, we're going to cross him, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. There's a big difference between what they want to do and what they say they will do and what they actually end up doing. Because once Donald Trump goes after them on Truth Social or on X, we've seen what the MAGA universe can do online. I think I'm hard-pressed to take them at their word right now, but it's safe to say that there is a lot of consternation about this specific pick.
Yeah, I suppose it will be a test of loyalty, won't it? Whatever their thoughts are about Gaetz, it's a test of loyalty to Trump. And as you say, there will be blowback should they defy him. And who, I wonder, in the Republican ranks at this stage, or ultimately, will defy Donald Trump, given the juggernaut that he now is driving through this place.
Exactly. And think about the makeup of Congress right now. 2/3 of members in the House have only gotten here in the Trump era or post-Trump era. I'm talking about his first presidency. That is a different makeup of Republicans in this body than we had from 2016 to 2020. A lot of these people were only elected officials in the era of Donald Trump.
Well, Julie, I am reliably informed that the Sky News Daily has to let you go back to NBC News to do the day job. So thank you so much for your time and your insight. We really appreciate it. James, however, we're still paying your salary, so stay exactly where you are. When we come back, we're going to be discussing another big pick and quite a familiar name, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. We'll see you in a sec. Welcome back. Continuing to talk through some of Donald Trump's choices for his top team with our US correspondent James Matthews joining us from inside Capitol Hill. And James, look, it is at this point, having reflected on Matt Gaetz and the problems that he may very well have when it comes to his confirmation, we turn to Donald Trump's pick for Health Secretary, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Now, there is a name that is familiar to both you and I. Explain why.
You're right, yeah. Part of the Kennedy dynasty, of course. He's the son of Bobby Kennedy, nephew of JFK. He is an environmental lawyer, a man who has no medical training, and yet he has been tapped by Donald Trump to be health secretary, to be in charge of this nation's health, food, and medicine. A huge job, literally a matter of life and death. And it's fallen to RFK Jr., to howls of derision and despair, I have to say, amongst many, particularly those invested in the public health infrastructure in this country, who are asking the question about, A, his knowledge, but also statements that he has made in the past. He's an anti-vaxxer. He is a conspiracy theorist, an individual who says that HIV doesn't cause AIDS. He has described vaccines as dangerous and unproven. So the accusation is being levelled that he is absolutely the last person who should be anywhere near the health interests of this nation, and yet he's been appointed to the plum job. He also has a colourful background. I mean, no stranger to consumers of the media because of events, weird events in his life. There was the day that he picked up a dead bear cub, roadkill, and took it home, put it in the back of his van. He's quite cheerfully tells his story on social media. Stuck it in the back of the van, drove to New York, he was going to cook it, stick it in the fridge, decided he didn't have time, so left it in a park under a bush in New York next to a bicycle to make it look like an accident. And just a bizarre episode in the life of this individual. And of course, now he surfaces as the would-be health secretary. Donald Trump had him on stage at his victory night, said, I'm going to let him go wild on health. It's scaring a lot of people. He needs to be confirmed by the Senate. But right now, there are many running around with their hair on fire at the prospect of such an individual being in such a position, essentially an unserious man being put in a very serious position, according to critics.
I mean, some of his views, particularly around vaccines, are so far removed from empirical evidence that they are worth dwelling on. I mean, he has often made the link between vaccinations and autism, a link which, frankly, there is absolutely no scientific proof. I mean, how has he managed to get away with this? Or indeed, is it this contrary stance that he is adopting that makes him so attractive to Donald Trump?
What's attracted him to Donald Trump is the politics of it all, because remember, RFK Jr. Was running in this election. He was running as an independent and did enjoy a degree of support, which was eating in actually more to Trump than it was to Joe Biden at the time. RFK Jr., he gave up that election run and threw his weight behind the Donald Trump campaign. So there was a debt to be paid, a political debt, and this clearly is the kickback in announcing RFK Jr. as Trump's choice. Donald Trump himself, he put on Truth Social, for too long, Americans have been crushed by the industrial food complex and drug companies who have engaged in deception, misinformation, and disinformation when it comes to public health. So that's the Donald Trump narrative around this particular selection, and it feeds into the narrative that he has long played, and I have to say resonated with voters, is that government is against you, it needs fixed, and I am the man to fix it. Quite what the fix is for public health and the health interests of the population at large here in the United States remains an open question, but it's a question to which many have a very strident answer, and that answer being that this pick is wrong, but it's particularly dangerous because of the department that he will run.
But as with many of the scions of these big American families, the political dynasties, the commercial dynasties, he has had a very checkered past, hasn't he? I mean, one remarkable quote I read from him is this: I have so many skeletons in my closet that if they could all vote, I could run for king of the world. I mean, one of those skeletons in the closet, of course, is relationships. I mean, he divorced someone whilst claiming he had a worm in his brain at one point.
Yeah, and that quote you talk about, the king, I mean, those words could have been spoken by Donald Trump, couldn't they? A man who now is in a position, a man having won a clean sweep at this election, he's a man in a position to do what he likes. That's why we have a situation where RFK Jr., dead bear, brainworm, questionable past or not, is in a pole position, to be elevated to considerable responsibility and authority. I mean, in terms of the broader picture, Donald Trump is looking at the key institutions in this country, institutions that he believes wronged him in the past, and particularly the three pillars of governance in this country, justice, the intelligence community, and also defense. Look at his picks for those three areas, and it's clear he's an individual who wants to tear them down, who wants to send MAGA warriors into those places that he would characterize as the deep state and rip them apart. It's Donald Trump's revenge mission. There was much talk about retribution and how if he was back in power, he would turn his sights on the people he believes wronged him in the past. And I think we are seeing evidence of that. The Justice Department, who stood up to him, who would not go along with his claims of electoral fraud in the past. The intelligence agencies, who stuck to their guns, who said, yep, there was Russian collusion in 2016, despite Trump's fierce denials and claims that this was being weaponized against him. And the Defense Department, that's long been populated by figures who took a withering view of Trump, and it also stood against his wishes, remember, to have troops deployed to the streets of Washington, D.C. during the rioting following the murder of George Floyd. So there's that element in his choices of lessons learned, of placing individuals more likely to do what they're told in key positions. And that's something that Trump has learned through his lived experience.
Well, look, James, we will soon find out whether RFK Jr., whether Matt Gaetz, and indeed the others already announced by Donald Trump will get there. Who knows? We could be seeing even more names coming soon. Many thanks to James and, of course, to NBC's Julie Tsirkin for joining us. That is your lot for today. If you want much more on what is happening across the pond in US politics with Donald Trump, just head to skynews.com. The Sky News Daily is back on Monday. We'll see you then. Have a lovely weekend.